Making news in America this morning, the nationwide investigation into the suspected bombs sent to prominent Democrats, now focusing on a mail facility in South Florida. What we're learning now about those devices as the man stating diagnosis. For the first time, we hear from the race car driver involved in this horrific crash on the track, his struggle, and how he's holding out hope.
Those stories, plus the shocking find at a Goodwill store dating back centuries.
Forget those sky-high rents. We meet the San Francisco couple living in a 60-square-foot van.
A spool of trouble, the slow-rolling highway horror in Houston.
And the feel-good story of the week, the young man helping a woman in need. She couldn't believe it.
From ABC News in New York, this is America This Morning.
And we do say Good Friday morning, everyone. I'm Candace Gibson.
And I'm Janae Norman. We begin with the urgent search for who's behind the terrifying bomb scare that's putting high-profile Democrats and other critics of President Trump on alert.
As investigators brace for more suspected bombs, they're now focusing on South Florida, where some of the devices may have originated. In the meantime, at 3:14 this morning, President Trump tweeting this message. Funny how lowly rated CNN and others can criticize me at will, even blaming me for the current spate of bombs and ridiculously comparing this to September 11th and the Oklahoma City bombing. Yeah, when I criticize them, they go wild and scream, it's just not presidential.
ABC's Elizabeth Hagedorn has the latest on the investigation into the bomb scares. Elizabeth, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Federal authorities are warning the public to stay alert. This as the investigation takes them to a postal facility in South Florida.
The manhunt continues coast to coast.
I can say with certainty that we will identify and arrest a person or people responsible for these acts. Make no mistake.
Federal investigators now chasing a lead in South Florida. Sources confirming to ABC News authorities believe at least some of the packages went through a mail facility near Miami. The devices now being analyzed at the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. All of them, ABC is told, went through the U.S. Postal Service.
We have over 600,000 postal employees out there right now, so we have their eyes and ears looking for these packages.
The investigation widened Thursday, with law enforcement seizing several more packages, bringing the total to 10. The latest intended recipients, actor Robert De Niro and former Vice President Joe Biden.
This division, this hatred, this ugliness, it has to end.
Sources tell ABC News federal agents are painstakingly combing through the evidence. The digital clocks inside, the explosive powder, the tape. Even the way the wiring is twisted could indicate whether the suspect is left or right-handed. As for if they believe the devices were actually meant to detonate or intended simply to spread fear, officials in New York declining to say.
I'm not going to talk about intent, but, if you were the bomb squad detective, how would you treat it?
Now, despite the common thread here being that all of the targets are vocal critics of President Trump, law enforcement declining to comment on a possible motive, including whether politics could have played a role. Candace, Janae.
Elizabeth Hagedorn there in Washington. Elizabeth, thank you.
And because the devices are still intact, they're providing a treasure trove of clues.
The fact that none of them exploded may also be crucial in figuring out the motive. Former FBI counterterrorism official Steve Gomez spoke with us overnight about what agents are trying to determine as they examine those devices right now.
And it seems like they were capable of going off, but would they have actually hurt anybody or killed anybody? Probably not, from what we understand were the contents inside these devices. And that's a big question as far as why would somebody put those types of devices into the mail system? As you started to go along and see that there were now 10 devices, and none of these devices went off, you start to wonder, okay, is this somebody who is maybe more concerned about affecting our political agenda, the political system, especially in light of the fact that we have an election coming up in 12 days? And that's something that, in my view, is more of a domestic terrorism type of situation where they're trying to influence.
And stay with ABC News for the latest on the investigation into the bomb threats and download the ABC News app for live coverage throughout the day.
Well, turning now to the other story that's breaking overnight, word that President Trump is considering a plan to close the southern border to stop migrants from entering the U.S. Any executive action that he takes to close the border will likely be met with a challenge in a federal court. A White House official says no final decisions have been made, but the president is sending 800 troops to support the U.S. Border Patrol as soon as next week. This action, mind you, just ahead of midterm elections. In the meantime, the caravan of migrants currently in southern Mexico and marching north has now dwindled from about 7,000 to 3,000. But the president is still tweeting about it, saying to those in the caravan, turn around. We are not letting people into the U.S. illegally. Go back to your country if you want to apply for citizenship like millions of others are doing. ABC's Marcus Moore is with the migrants in Mexico who have heard the president's message.
It hasn't deterred them. I mean, just look around, and you see the men, women, and children who are here, despite the threats that they've heard from President Trump and the White House. They have heard these things, but they're not worried about it. They still say that they need to get away from the violence and the corruption in their native countries, and also they're looking for opportunities that they think that they can find in the United States.
The migrant caravan remains about 1,000 miles away from the nearest U.S. city.
A child here in New York has now died of the flu. It's the second pediatric death in the United States this season, and the flu season is just getting started. The CDC urges everyone 6 months and older to get the flu shot. But officials say the number of people vaccinated last year actually dropped, which may explain why it was the deadliest flu season since the 1970s. A record number of children died last season. About 80% of those kids who died were not vaccinated.
One person is dead after an Amtrak train slammed into a dump truck. The crash happened in Suffolk, Virginia. 60 passengers were on the train at the time. None of them was seriously hurt, and the train did not derail. It was heading from New York to Norfolk, Virginia.
Turning now to the weather, a storm is on the move, heading from the deep south to the northeast, just in time for the weekend. Let's take a look at your Friday forecast.
Good morning. We're tracking a nor'easter that will impact the East Coast for these next couple of days, soaking rains first to the southeast, then arriving to the northeast on Saturday. This is going to cause a good bit of rain. We're talking 1 to 3 inches in major cities from D.C. all the way up into Boston. Also looking at high gusting winds. Those gusts up to 60 miles per hour could cause coastal flooding. I'm meteorologist Julia Wyden with your AccuWeather forecast.
One couple is saying no to the high rents of San Francisco. Coming up, the van they've decided to call home.
But first, the shocking moment, a sidewalk collapsed from underneath these two women.
And a frightening sight on the highway in Houston, a giant spool spinning toward cars.
And next, why Michael Avenatti, the lawyer famous for taking on President Trump, could now face a criminal investigation.